This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by OWC, Isotope, Atom Audio, Jay-Z Microphones, and Spectra 1964. You're hearing my voice right now on the Jay-Z V12 microphone through the Spectra 1964 STX100D mic pre and C610 complementer with Isotope, RX, Ozone, and Neutron all recorded safely onto an OWC SSD and mixed on Atom Audio monitors. Please remember to check out our awesome sponsors using the link in the show notes. It's a great way to help support this show. Now get ready to rock.
Where does an instrument take you? Like a lot of times a piano takes you indoors. If you're trying to give an image of like an outdoor, sprawling, natural thing, the second you put piano on that, it's taking you indoors. This was a very urban, gritty record. I call it like black and shiny, neon lights reflecting off wet pavement kind of vibe. The real strings sounded brown.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Hey Rockstars, over here. I've got a secret to tell you about how I get a consistent sound mixing over 1,000 hours of Recording Studio Rockstars. My secret is using Isotope, RX, Ozone, and Neutron on every single episode. Right now, you're hearing RX breath control, D-click, D-clip, DS, D-plosive, voice denoise, Ozone multiband compression, Neutron EQ, and limiting, all from Isotope. Go to isotope.com/rockstars and use the secret code ROCK10 and get 10% off any plug-in purchase from Isotope. You can tell your friends, but, be cool about it. My recording studio is proudly powered by OWC, and I love how it's improved and sped up my workflow. OWC can connect all your audio work drives, trackballs, mix controllers, MIDI keyboards, audio interfaces, displays, or cameras so that you can work fast and focus on making your best record ever. Go check out the Mini Stack STX, Thunder Bay 4, or Gemini Thunderbolt 3 dock at macsales.com/rockstars to find the perfect solution for your studio from OWC. Howdy Rockstars, it's your host Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Adam Greenspan, a Grammy-nominated engineer, mixer, and producer who had a pretty good start to his career engineering Faith No More's Album of the Year at age 20. He later spent time at two world-class studios, Westlake Audio and The Village Recorder, working with artists such as Marilyn Manson, Rage Against the Machine, and Bono before going freelance in 2000. Adam has been a guest on the show previously on episode 289 when we talked about his background in music, and I'm sure we talked about a lot of those things at Westlake and Village. So I'm psyched to have you back on the show again. Today we're going to see what's new in Adam's studio and talk about making records, mixing, all that good stuff. Again, a thank you to Adris Evelis at Jay-Z Microphones for making our introduction originally. Please welcome back Adam Greenspan, Recording Studio Rockstars. Adam, are you ready to rock, dude?
Always ready to rock.
Glad to have you here, man.
Thanks. Good to be here.
I'm trying to remember. That wasn't terribly long ago that we did our interview, but it was a little while ago.
Was that during the dark ages?
Yeah, during the dark ages, indeed. So now that we're back in the great Renaissance, out of the dark ages, what's new with you, man? What's new with your studio, and where are you joining us from?
I'm joining you from my studio, Slam Dance Cosmopolis, in the Glassell Park neighborhood of Los Angeles, California.
We probably talked about that. I'm sure I picked up on it right away, but of course that's combat rock, isn't it?
That is. It's the song Ghetto Defendant, and it's got a The vocal is actually a poem by Allen Ginsberg, and that's Allen Ginsberg actually reading that on the record.
That was one of my favorite tracks on that record. That whole record, I just love that record so much.
Yeah, I mean, it's such, it's one of the first records I ever had, to be honest. I was probably of the age where I was too young to have been around for any other Clash albums. I was only just barely old enough to be into that by the time that last album came out. But for anyone who wants to go to my Instagram page, I was recently in Greece, and if you're familiar with that song, the next line after Slam Dance Cosmopolis is "Do the Worm on Acropolis," and there's a video on my Instagram from my trip to Greece this summer. I did get yelled at by security, but it was worth it.
Well, that's a lot better than those kids who are throwing paint all over Van Gogh paintings to make their statements. I like doing the worm on Acropolis. Seems like a much better use of your efforts. Well, that's awesome. I've been to Greece. I was there when I was little. I was 6 years old, and my dad was a international banker, actually. And so I think he loved traveling, and he took us to the Middle East, and we got to go to Greece as well. And I saw the Acropolis. And then, of course, we have a life-size rendition of the Parthenon here in Nashville, Tennessee, from, I guess, when the World's Fair was here. I forgot what year it was.
Wow.
But yeah, so we have a full-size replica of it, and that's not falling to pieces. So
right,
maybe I'll go do a worm there, and I'll send it over to you. So you got to back up.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Well, that's great, man. Slam Dance Cosmopolis. So, what are some things that you've done in your studio that you feel like have been a direct tribute to the Clash, in sonically?
Oh man. Actually just mixed the new album for Flogging Molly, called Anthem. Came out, I think, in September. The single came out on St. Patrick's Day. And so that definitely had some Clash vibes going on. But I also think that Idol's Ultramono, I mean, maybe not sonically, but, the meaning behind that record and just the political engagement, the community engagement, the social engagement of that record, and the lyrics.
Tell us, we talked about that last time, but bring us back up to speed on some of the message that was important in that record.
Well, Joe Talbot, the singer, has always been very political, but at the same time, the band have a sense of humor. And I think they keep it very real. But there's the first song is a anti-violence, anti-war song. Just talking about just economic issues and gender equality, and it's very important. And it's been really great to have been involved in that album and the album before, because especially Ultramono, it was a successful record, but what really makes that success important to me is the fact that it was a quite transgressive record sonically and lyrically, and it was one of the heaviest, most aggressive records, and one of the records that I was most proud of just making. And then having that be the record that has, that hits that level of success, it to me, that means a lot more. There's it could just have been any one of any other records that, might have, not really had that same place in my heart, from making it.
Yeah, that's a good feeling if the stuff that you work on that really means something to you is also the thing that succeeds. That kind of happened to me too, where I've experienced spending a lot of time working on a project that I felt like, oh, this has got to be this is the one that will do well. And then maybe the success and the recognition didn't happen, but this other thing I did over here that was just for fun ends up being the thing that gets the recognition. And that's like such a great feeling when that happens.
Yeah, it's just like, I finished it and it was like, you know what? If nothing else, this is my favorite record I've ever made.
That's great.
And then for that to be the one that kind of blows up that way is like, oh, that's just really like, it's very reassuring.
Right.
It feels really good.
Well, we can just jump back in and keep talking about that record some more if you want. At the risk of repeating ourselves on our last episode, if you feel like you already talked about any
Probably
particular
did. I
things.
mean, I think that record was pretty new, when we spoke last. So, since
That's definitely a rocker of a record.
It is. It's brutal. But since then, I just produced and mixed a new album for Bloc Party.
Oh, cool, man! Those guys are so great.
Yeah, yeah.
I will say that not Silent Alarm. What's the? Is that it? Was that the first one?
album? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. That one had this great guitar effect that was just like rushing at you,
Mm-hmm.
and it's always stuck with me in my head. So like whenever I want to do something bold with guitars and reverbs, I always conjure that up in my head. And I'm sure my recollection of it is completely wrong, to what it actually was. But just that idea of like making really bold statements, it was one of those ones where I thought, I wonder if that was a mix move, or a production move. But tell us about that record. Tell us about what you did with Bloc Party. Those guys are great.
Yeah. So, it had been a project that was in the works for a while because, it literally came in at the beginning of COVID. And so, it kept having, for obvious reasons, it got pushed back. So, we were talking about it and it was on our minds for a long time. So I think we had a lot of like, it was, a lot of working up to the record because, of the fact that it had been pushed back. But we made it actually last summer, summer of 2021. In London at Conch Studios, which I love. I had worked there in the past. Nick Launay, who I was working with again, he had worked there. And it was real exciting. The band have a couple new members. Their new drummer, Louise Bartle, is absolutely amazing. And she's already been with them for 5 years, but this is the first album they've recorded in that time. So
now, is that Alpha Games? Is that the name of the record? I don't know that Alpha one made it into our playlist yet. So I'll drag that over right now and put it in there for you, rock stars.
All right. But she is one of the most incredible drummers I've ever worked with. And it was, just amazing working with them. A lot of focus,
really fast drums too. That's what I remember.
Yeah,
from Silent
really
Alarm.
fast. I mean,
blazing.
I mean, she's like an athlete, and the band always had a great rhythm section, and they still sound fantastic, and just bringing her own style to the new songs. For the first time, being able to play something that she wrote the parts and was there for the writing. It was, I think, really refreshing to the band as well to finally hear what it is she brings to the table as opposed to just playing the parts from all the previous records that were recorded, before her time in the band. So I think it was a real great experience for everybody, getting to make this record.
And apologies, tell us her name again.
Louise Bartle.
Louise Bartle. Okay, great. And so, what do you remember about recording those drums? Because I'm sure we'll want to know that as we listen to the record.
Well, despite kind of having the history of like the big explosive roomy drum sounds, for a lot of these tempos and these songs, that just really wasn't the thing. So, it was much, much tighter, more controlled type sounds. One end of the room there is kind of, the ceiling dips and it is sort of like the dead end of the room. It's got carpet down. So we actually placed the kit there, which unfortunately just meant her back was to the control room, but got to do what you got to do. But more like room mics up close. I had a pair of U47s that were really only like a few feet back from the front of the kit, right at like maybe waist level. And that sounded really great. It was warm and tight. We set up a lot of our traditional far room mic things just to hear what it sounded like, but for a lot of the songs it just didn't work. It was, it's just kind of at those tempos, it's just not really the thing.
And that's with including overheads as well. So it's like U47's out in front, spaced a little bit, but still overheads.
Yeah, I mean overheads. The way I record, I tend, because of how many other ambient mics I use, I tend to close mic my cymbals, or at least just 2 mics close, just so that so I don't really have a traditional overhead like capturing the whole kit. I've done it in the past. Sometimes when I do that, I like it in mono. Because if you do it in mono, it helps you kind of like, because it's mono, if you center it, like
or ultra
you don't
mono.
really have imaging issues, because in reality, a snare drum is to the side of the drum kit. When you're trying to give like a stereo image and you do really, really, really accurate stereo miking of the drum kit, then the snare is going to be off to a side because that is actually where the snare drum is.
Yeah, it's true. And I found myself doing that and it can confuse my brain sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And then, maybe I'll try the Glyn Johns kind of thing where it is that mono overhead.
Yeah.
And then I'll end up panning it to the left anyway.
Right, exactly.
Okay, cool. Well, so actually the first time I ever saw that idea of miking the cymbals was working with Steve Albini at Electrical. And that was something he did where he would put up like a Coles near each crash.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, that's so cool. Like, why not? I mean, I guess in the right kind of room and the right kind of sounds, it gives you more direct control over each part, right?
Yeah. I mean, if you want, I like it because then if you want, you can really tighten the kit and just have these close mics on the cymbals if you need them, Sometimes you don't even need them if your room mic is quite washy, but it's good to have them.
So how would you describe that? So you said a pair of U47s in front of the kit?
Mm-hmm.
How would you describe that sound? Like, what does that sound like if we're trying that out?
It had some compression on it, but not too much. You can always add more, but you're not going to be able to take it off. And it using that, because it didn't have too much distance and it had a warmth, it just really sort of filled out the space around the close mics without really sounding roomy. And it just, it just was a little more transparent of not making itself known as like, oh, these room mics, which was just a nice, it just filled out, as opposed to using just the close mics.
And then what about placement of a pair of mics? Like, so if we're thinking, oh, that sounds cool, I want to try that in my studio. What are some ways for us to think about where we could start putting the mics in front of the kit? Also, what if there's walls nearby? How do we handle that? Do they work in front of a kit as long as there's nothing else around them, or will they still work even if there's
it's fine. I mean, ears and microphones sound a little bit different, but you can kind of just walk around the room, and if you find a spot like, ooh, dude, something sounds really cool here, like, oh, I feel like in this spot I'm hearing all the parts of the kit, well balanced, as opposed to being really kick heavy or really snare heavy in a particular place in the room. If you find that, just try a mic there. But in this case, there wasn't anything super close to where I had positioned these mics. They were just right in front of the kit. Like I said, maybe 4 to 6 feet tops. I don't even think they were that far. I mean, they could have only been like 3 or 4 feet back. So it's fairly close. And they were about at the level of the toms. We were doing a lot of like overdubbing cymbals anyway. Because that was Louise's choice. I don't know if the way we were recording, we wouldn't have had to do that, but she wanted to. So that was fine.
Yeah, that's a cool thing. We've talked about that on the show. I think I've tried that. Yeah, I've tried that before. I didn't quite have luck with it, but I think, that was the first time I tried it too.
Well, there's some really great tricks that you can do. One is oftentimes we'll leave the cymbals up and we'll tape pillows to them so that the drummer can still actually reach over and hit something. It just won't make any sound. Especially if it's something where if it's a rhythmic part on a cymbal and it's part of the groove. I mean, I kind of feel like if there is a rhythmic part, it needs to be played live, but it really depends on the drummer. It was great because this was her choice to do this. It can be quite off-putting for a drummer if you're not used to
right. If you're trying to
parts
convince
down like
somebody
that,
to do it,
and you don't want to like bum someone's vibe out. but this was, she actually requested to do this. So it was like, oh, cool, great, awesome. And, makes our life easier to mix because it gives us more options. And if the drummer is already keen to do it, then great, cool.
The Jay-Z Microphone Vintage Series are built by hand in Latvia, featuring the patented golden drop capsule design for enhanced clarity that will give your recordings the classic vintage tone. Our friends at Jay-Z Microphones have also come up with a special offer only available to Recording Studio Rockstars listeners. Use the limited time coupon ROCKSTAR to get 40% off the V67, V47, or V12 microphones. And to make this deal even better, they'll throw in a free shock mount worth $120 for a limited time at jzmic.com. Adam Audio can provide all your monitor needs, whether you are setting up a first-time home studio for recording music or podcasts, or a world-class full-size studio for professional mixing and mastering in stereo or immersive sound. Featuring the XART tweeter and custom DSP onboard processing, the new A-series monitors will perfectly adapt to your studio. Get the Adam Audio monitors and subwoofers that are right for you with an extended 5-year warranty at adamaudio.com. That's kind of like the rule of thumb for everything in the studio, right? It's like if the musician is really on board with the concept, then you get a totally different result than if you find yourself trying to convince somebody to do something that they're like, what the hell is this,
Right, yeah. Yeah, and it's great, when some people are open-minded, but also, you just want to make sure the most important thing is the vibe. You can always find a way to make something sound the way you need it to sound. As long as you have the vibe and that's really what it's about anyway,
When you're doing these mics out in front of the kit, what about how far apart are they? And do you pan them
also
left
probably
and right?
they're going to be left and right. And, they're maybe only about 6 feet apart. It's kind of like, or maybe they're a little bit wider than they are far back from the kit. Yeah. And I mean, there might have been like a Cole's room as well. Trying to remember. I mean,
Nice.
Yeah.
What about some of the other instruments like guitars and bass? Then maybe
I do want to mention, because you mentioned Jay-Z microphones.
Oh, yeah.
I think I mentioned this in my last interview, but that Jay-Z, what is it? What's it called? V11. I think it's called.
That's such a great
That's
mic.
my Tom mic. That is my Tom mic.
Really?
Yeah.
So how would you mic up the toms with it? Is it looking down at the toms or is it looking across the head kind of thing?
Yeah, it's pretty much looking down, maybe a little bit of an angle, like not quite 45 degrees, but not quite totally flat.
So Rockstar's V11 is it's a very cool mic from Jay-Z Microphones. I think of it as kind of dark. It's almost like a ribbon of condensers, large diaphragm, I guess. And no pad switch or anything like that too. So what about that? Do you, how high or how near the head would you set a mic like that?
They have a lot of headroom, to be honest. So I just and I usually use a 414. In the past, I'd use 414s as my go-to. So, about the same thing. They can take it. They can take a really high SPL. I might pad the mic pre, but the mic can totally handle it. Not only that, the mic can handle getting beaten by a drumstick because she tore one of them up.
Thanks, Louise. Well, I
got her to sign it afterwards.
That's great. That's awesome. That's awesome.
It was brand new, and then it was beat to hell.
And then it wasn't.
Record. Yeah.
That's great. I used to use those Octava MK12 mics a lot on toms for a little while. And, they were like $100 mics. So it was sort of like if they got hit, it's like, all right.
Yeah.
But they also didn't sound great on the cymbals that were nearby. The cymbals would just rip your head off. What about mic and toms and what happens with the cymbals? I guess you don't have the overheads there. So maybe that cymbal that's bleeding into the toms is acceptable, or do you find that that's usually getting edited out later in a mix?
Yeah, I might chop it out anyway. I mean, it depends. Depends on the part. And like I said, if she's overdubbing a cymbal, then
right,
doesn't really
it didn't
matter.
Yeah, good point.
You know? But I find when the mic's close enough to the tom, it's not usually that big a deal.
Yeah, well, that makes such a big point, because so many things, hi-hats and snares, brightening up the snares, but then having cymbals come in, toms, and then the way the cymbals come in, all that goes away if you save your cymbals for later.
Yeah.
So
really
definitely worth exploring, Rockstars.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. How about stuff like bass and guitars? Are these bass parts where it sounds like a bass rocking out through an amp? Is that an important sound? And then how would you handle something like that? Would you have a DI and an amp and then try and make them both live together? Or would you just say the amp's the jam, let's make that work? Yeah,
no, I always like to have a DI. It definitely, you could get kind of a more even low end out of a DI. It's always a nice balance, especially if you want the amp to be quite growly and quite aggressive and distorted. It's nice to have that other track there. But,
do you find that they fight each other for low end though, or anything like that?
No, because a lot of times I'll take low end out of the amp, and let the amp be more the mid range and top growl.
Even if you heard the speaker, you'd be like, "Oh, there's no bass coming out of this," kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always wondered about that. If that's like, let the amp do what it would normally do, and then, EQ it off later, or just record the amp kind of without a ton of low end, like this amp, like create an amp sound that wouldn't work by itself on a stage necessarily.
Maybe, yeah. It depends. I mean, I find that, I don't know. You do have to control the low end later on, maybe, but yeah, for the most part, yeah, an amp is going to give you, your mid range and your growl, something like an SVT, or we were using a high watt, 200 watt, high watt bass rig.
Nice.
It sounded great.
But I mean, would you agree though that if you try to put the low end in the DI and in the bass amp and then mix them together, you can find yourself going like, why doesn't this work?
Yeah, true. But I would probably just tend to, take some low end out of the amp later. I would shoot for a sound that stands on its own the best. And then if I need to trim it, if I need to filter it later.
Okay, cool.
Make it a little, do what you need to do to it.
Just do what you need to do, man. How about guitars? What do you remember from guitars on that record?
I remember that they had, they both had Fender Hot Rod DeVilles. Yeah, Hot Rod DeVilles, which, I think they're one of the bands that really put that amp on the map, to be honest. It is literally the sound of that generation of guitar bands. But, they're also, having not toured in a while, and all their gear had been sitting in a lockup like for 3 years, some of those amps needed love. And I think they had 4 of them, and by the time we were done, we had used them all at one point or another.
Wow.
I think some didn't make it all the way through the recording. But High Watt also sent us a ton of stuff too. So for actually both guitar players, we were using a Fender amp and some High Watt amp.
Oh, that's cool.
In combo. And it sounded great. And, it was just fun doing, exciting guitar parts. Two really cool guitar players.
The guitars typically are strongly pushed clean sounds. And then, is there much in the way of fuzz or distortion?
Well, yeah,
pedals, that kind of
traditionally,
thing?
No, not so much with that band, but they have evolved over the years, and they do have a kind of unique, heavy sound that they go for sometimes too. In fact, the first single from the album, Traps, is a heavier song that we knew from the second we heard the demo. It was like, first single, that's the jam right there.
Yeah.
That's going to be the one. It was always going to be the leadoff song. So it was, in recording it, it was just like, hey, don't screw it up.
Yeah. What about from your role, do you find yourself encouraging bands to unplug the pedals they're not using and simplify the guitar chain every time you're laying down a guitar part, or do you feel more relaxed
because a lot of times, like, one thing you don't want to do is find something's making noise and we've got like 20 things plugged in and like 18 of them aren't being used, so it's just like, let's just scale it back a little bit. And it depends on the guitar player too. If they have a real definite idea of like, okay, this is this sound, so I got to have this, and then this is this sound. Whereas I think with this time around, with Bloc Party, I think it was just, let's find a sound from scratch. We heard what we did on the demo, and we know what we've done in rehearsals to do that, but let's just, if you have a better idea, let's just, let's make a sound from scratch.
Yeah, that's cool. And it's interesting to hear you use the word demo too. That's something that I don't ask about much on the podcast, but it really needs to be asked too, is what is a process for making a record these days? With the rock band, it's like, I guess you got different ways people come up with stuff. You've got the song sketch that's a voice memo. You've got the band capture that becomes a song. Mm-hmm. But like, what does a process look like where it gets created as a demo and then you guys record it? And what kind of stuff can you share as far as lessons from that process that work really well, or things to watch out for?
Well, I mean, I always like to have demos in advance. I mean, if I don't, I can't really come prepared if I haven't heard something before. And, I just think in this day and age, the idea of just, going into a studio with an artist and without anything written in advance, I mean, who can afford that these days to just,
yeah. But I mean,
it's
even
not really much of an option. So the demo process is pretty important.
What if something, I mean, do you find bands coming in that have written the song, but they don't necessarily have a studio style demo? It's more of just like, an iPhone in the rehearsal space, or is everybody making demos because it's so easy to do?
I think there's a little bit of everything. I mean, a lot of times I'll get demos where the drums are programmed. And sometimes I'm kind of surprised. I'm like, oh, wow, it's good programming. I guess there's like loops and stuff, and there's like some programs, I guess, that are really good at like,
Yeah. I've had that happen where I'm like, I'm supposed to beat this.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, I think Bloc Party's demos were just recorded in a rehearsal room, and just, I think the drum sounds were maybe triggered or something for the demo. So like, as long as they had a microphone on the drum, they could make it sound like whatever they wanted, and then start playing.
When you start out with a demo, do you find it useful to import those tracks into the Master Pro Tools session, for example, and start building where you're
I love to do that. Yeah, because it gives you like really good perspective. Also, I was quite shocked because I've always felt like Bloc Party are a great live band. And I always shoot for recording bands live, everyone together. And they preferred not to do it that way. A lot of times what we did, like some of the songs had demos that were fleshed out enough to where we could literally just take the drums out of the demo. I had stems of the demos, and I could just mute the drums, and she could just play the drums to the demo.
Right.
Everyone else's parts on the demo, because we weren't changing tempo, or even if we were changing tempo, you can elastic time that,
right.
And still be able to manipulate that, and at least close enough for a vibe. It doesn't have to sound good. It just has to. It's just a blueprint. So some of that, and then there were a few songs where we didn't have that, and the band would actually play a couple takes together live to a click track. We'd figure out the tempo, and then she would just play drums. We basically just use that live take just as everyone's guide, musical guide for her to then replay the drums, and again, like and then everyone would redo their other parts after she did drums.
I find that to be
really
useful. And they were real
fast
too
at doing their parts, I gotta say. Like really, really well focused band.
Okay, if you don't mind, I'll keep digging into this, because this stuff's super meaningful for me. So
cool.
I agree. I find it really useful to let the band perform something together in the studio setting, and then replace stuff at times because the performance, if it needs it, but this performance in the studio gives you this true representation of the feel of the song in that studio environment too, in a way.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's, I think if people have heard the records I've made and like them, that's probably a big part of why they like them and why those records have the vibe that they do, because as much as possible, that is exactly how I like to work and how I like to capture an artist. And I think it really does make a difference if it's something the artist wants to do.
Yeah.
And obviously that's a band thing for the most part. I mean, if you have a solo artist, then maybe that's not as important to get a band with them performing, live. But I do tend to work more with bands.
Hey, rock stars, are you recording your own music or other people's music in your studio, but you're having trouble getting your mixes to sound great? Do they sound kind of weak or distant or lack punch or clarity? Well, I've got a gift to help you take your mixes from sounding like basement demos to sounding a lot closer to professional mixes. And it's my free introductory course called Mix Master Bundle. This course shows you how to get pro sound with your mixes from your home studio using free plugins and Pro Tools. And the best part is that these fundamental mixing techniques will work for you in any DAW, whether you're in Logic, Cubase, PreSonus, Studio One, Reaper, or whatever you're using. If you're ready to make your best record ever, then go to mixmasterbundle.com and get started now for free. And you can find the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. And there's a lot to be said, too, for getting the drums down and then hearing those drums while you're putting down your guitar part or your bass part, really like getting things precise. I find that can be really helpful at times. What about the simple question of like, okay, should you bring your guitar into the control room now and do these overdubs to the speakers, or should you stay out there where you were all set up for tracking and just play again in headphones? And same for bass. What are some thoughts you have about, reasons to do it one way or the other? What are some of the benefits or drawbacks to either one?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of times what we do is if I'm recording live, we get a take, you still might need, someone still might need to drop in a part or something, you might, here and there. Obviously, if we're just dropping in parts, it's probably easier for them to just go right back to where they played initially, because when you start moving things, like, oh, something got bumped and now it sounds different and we can't drop in. And it's like,
yeah.
And also it's like, if it's going to take you longer to move than to replay the part, then just do it.
Yeah.
Totally. I mean, sometimes you have a complicated setup with a bunch of pedals. It's going to take you half an hour to get it into the control room. You could probably replay the song perfectly in one take. That'll be done in 4 minutes. Like, just go out there and play it again.
Yeah. And you're in the zone too. It's like, I think your brain gets used to the way the track sounds, whether you've been listening in headphones or listening on the speakers.
Yeah. And it's, the only thing that's a little different is that, obviously when you are doing that live take, you're hearing a lot of drum in the room and you kind of feel that air moving around you. So, if you go out to drop something in by yourself after that, your headphone mix is a little, it's not what you think it is.
Yeah.
Because the drums aren't playing in real time in the room with you.
Yeah.
You at least feel that in your body, that
yeah.
air.
I'm always struck by that when I'm going out and playing guitar myself and the drums are there. Like, what I need in the headphones is so different from what I think sounds like a good balance when I'm engineering from the control room. And I'm just like,
because you need to be able to feel the time. And if you can physically feel it, that's great. And then you obviously need that a lot louder when you're just listening to playback.
What about things like, do you ever feel like the guitar, the guitar and the amp sort of being in the same space, like they talk to each other in a way that doesn't happen if you move the guitar far enough away from the amp?
Well, I mean, it depends, if you're looking to get a lot of feedback on purpose, then sure. But I tend to like to have the people in the room together and then have the amps isolated from the people. I don't mind if I have two different players' guitar amps in the same room, as long as they're both playing well, you put a gobo between them, it's good enough. You're not, again, you got a guitar amp that's so loud. If you have a microphone right up on it, it's not going to hear anything else by the time,
Right.
Any spill in the room is the noise floor. So it's not a problem.
So would you sometimes set up the band in one room where everything's bleeding, but since you're about to replace the drums, then you get a clean drum recording on the replacement, and then you replace the guitar, and now you got a clean guitar?
I mean, I'd prefer not to have stuff bleeding. Like I said, I'd like to have the amps isolated. I'd much rather have the amps off somewhere. Because also the amps don't need a nice place. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're not gonna kill an amp's vibe if it's in a weird closet. You know what I mean? Whereas a person, you don't want to put a person some of the places you can put an amp. But no, I just think that just the presence of being in the room together is important for the people.
Yeah, I agree. You feel it. Plus, there's like a visual thing that happens when people are so close to you. You can just tell what they're doing, even if you can't hear it.
And it also depends. Even when I use a click track, I really prefer to only have the drummer hear the click track and just everyone else play to the drums. Unless there's a breakdown where, someone else needs to be able to carry a section without the drums in, whatever that is. And, there's ways, sometimes I'll even automate, I'll have their click track coming from a different click track that only turns on when they need it. Something like that. And again, that's why it's great when you have demo tracks and you can kind of, you can already like preemptively have those types of things ready for the artist, knowing like, all right, there's this guitar break here and like, I can have a click track already ready to go for a guitar player.
Yeah, that's awesome. I definitely do that too, where I'll sometimes just ride the fader up and down on the click. And, the drummer's always got like, the more me for the drums is just click, it's just like, just tons and tons of click.
Yeah. I like to automate stuff like that because there's so much to do when you're recording that anything that I can know is going to happen automatically, regardless of whether I remember to do it. Let's just let the robots do their job.
Let the robots do. Yeah. Nice. What about tape? Is that a thing for you? Are you recording a tape at all?
Nope.
No. There you go. Love
Done.
it. Done with that question.
Unnecessary. There's a million plugins that will emulate that sound and they'll do it pretty well. And to be honest, when I did use tape, I didn't push it to the point that it really everyone who says they love the sound of tape, what they love is the sound of abusing tape.
Right.
They're like, they're using plugins or they're using a real tape machine and the needles are smashed and you're just like smush, smush, smush. I'm like, I love that sound. I'm like, yeah, even when I use tape, I did not make my record sound like that. So, I don't miss it. It just makes things take too long and, rewind. What is rewind?
Rewind. Let's play again. I don't want to wait. Okay. What about, let's see. Any other thoughts on bass? Would you bring the bass player into the control room or basically follows the same idea?
Honestly, I would bring anyone into the control room if we're kind of setting up to do something fresh. If it doesn't take too long, if it's simple enough, come in the control room. It's, you're going to be able to vibe, it can give you a better mix, and speakers that where you can give you the sensation of being in the room with the drummer because you are now in the room with speakers. And, I love using the mains when I'm tracking. If a room has good sounding mains, just let the player feel it, give them that experience and that feeling of just that energy, Now there, some players don't want that. I've had some players like, can you turn it down in here? I'm like,
I'm struck by that myself too. So when I'm playing guitar, sometimes I'll crank it up, but then sometimes I turn it way down. I'm like, oh, it's so easy to play that part now. Really love on. What about you? What's your first instrument? Are you a musician as well?
Yeah, I played guitar like starting around like age 13.
Yeah,
and when I played in bands in high school, there was like always another guitar player. And that's sort of how I got into producing was just like, it seemed like my ear was better than my chops. And
I'm sure if I went and did my own homework and listened to the episode we just did, that I'd remember all those things because we probably talked about them too.
Maybe.
But yeah, so guitar would be that's the thing that you feel like you understand really well.
Yeah, I mean, I know it well. It's a very creative instrument. I'm a big like pedal nerd. Like I mix with a lot of pedals too. So,
cool. Yeah.
I'm a big pedal nerd, so I love working with other pedal nerd guitar players. I mean, I have a huge Pelican case of stuff that I travel with, microphones and pedals, because they're the only things that are really small enough to cart with you. I mean, we used every single pedal that I brought on that record. Like,
so
I was careful to like leave them in the case until I used them. And on the last day, there were like 2 or 3 pedals left in the case. And I was like, all right, here's our job for the day, is to find a way to use these 3 pedals.
Nice. This is a question that I've been asking recently on the show, was like the pedal board itself, like, does it make sense for us to try and like kind of come up with a core pedal board that can go to the control room, can go out to the floor? Do you find that it's more useful to just kind of have pedals always free flowing and you just plug in what you need when you need it?
Yeah, I just go free flowing because I can just work faster and like sometimes when I'm changing pedals out, I'm throwing jumpers and
yeah.
And
it's always on the floor, right?
You want to like change the order of something, or the problem, once it's on a board, you can't really get in and out of it, real easy. You're just going through the whole board. And I just got too many different things to like use a board.
So am I picturing this correct? When it's guitar pedal time, you're just down on the floor like a mad scientist?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, the control room, and I've had many times with control rooms, like you can't walk through it because I'm just down pedals everywhere. Yeah. It's a little weird too, because you like I'm on the floor, but I'm reaching up with my arm as high as I can to hit the keyboard to start and stop totally. Pro Tools, And then also you're like, you have to get up every once in a while and be like, maybe I should listen to the speakers and make sure this.
Yeah. Well, it's good to have a good assistant. You can just let them drive and you can just kind of produce and create, it's good to have someone who can take over.
Then you need to have visual sign language for like start, stop, going to record, let it roll, all those things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. Let's talk about vocals. What do we want to know about vocals on Bloc Party?
That was an SM7. I've been using dynamic mics on vocals more and more and more. Getting away from the fancy stuff. And I love fancy microphones, don't get me wrong. But
you're on one right now.
I'm on a kind of fancy microphone that my good friend Manny Nieto made, modified.
Oh, cool.
His company's called Original Gravity Wave Microphone Company, and this is a mod that he does to an MXR ribbon mic that sounds awesome on guitar amps.
So Rockstar's
absolutely awesome.
Oh, that's cool. So Adam's recording himself, and I'm only hearing him on Zoom. So if you hear him on Zoom, it means the recording didn't make it over. But if you hear him sounding great, it means that you're hearing what he just described.
Let me double check Pro Tools real quick.
All right, there we go. This is the real world, Rockstars. You press record in Pro Tools, and then you double check it later and make sure it's still working, because sometimes it doesn't do what we think it's doing.
We are still red on Pro Tools.
Awesome. The SM7 is such a great mic. We were talking about that recently too. Just, it's this, when I first learned about it, it was a session where I think there was some bleed and some producer was like, oh, we got to get this mic in for you. It's the one that Michael Jackson used, and he brings in the SM7. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, that's cool. But in my experience, it became this one where I'm like, if I just need something that's going to work for everybody and I don't know what I'm in for yet, it's like this universal, it's probably going to sound pretty great.
I think part of the reason why it works so well on Kelly is, his vocal style, for one thing. You can hear a lot of detail in it. It's used somewhat in radio, maybe not as much as an RE20, but it's really good. Kelly has some of these songs are really fast There's almost like kind of a rapping quality to some of it, and it gets that really, really well. Anthony Kiedis, Chili Peppers, I don't know if he still does, but I've seen lots of footage of him recording on one. And it really makes sense for that type of vocal. And to be honest, everyone I know using it on vocals, it's almost always on a male vocal. I've never used one on a female vocal yet. I don't know. Could be cool. I don't know.
It does sound pretty cool. I used to take that, and that would be a default mic in my Bonnaroo studio, where it's like, many different artists. Adele came in once, and that's what I put on her voice, and it sounded great. But I do find that like I use it on a lot of male vocals, and I find that it sort of takes effects well too. If you want to really kind of do something to it afterwards, it seems to work well for that.
Yeah, that's true. Like, I find that like, especially if you want to distort it, like distorting, like and I found, oddly enough, I found something really similar with the bass I bought recently. I got this really weird, like, it's a like Soviet era Bulgarian hollow body bass. The company's called Orpheus. It's super weird, like, but it's rad, and it has flat wounds on it. And, it has that kind of donk, donk, donk kind of sound. But if you plug it into fuzz, like the flat wounds actually sound cooler with fuzz than my more aggressive P bass with like round wound strings, which have their own kind of natural top end growl. And somehow it's just like that sort of clashes with fuzz, whereas like the softer sounding bass. And so maybe it's something similar with like, an SM7, you don't have all that super high end detail. Yeah. And so it just takes to distortion better. You kind of recreate that high end detail with a distortion. The harmonics become into that range because you don't already have a bunch of stuff in that range. So maybe that's why.
Yeah, I guess so. And in my experience too, of like having a tracking mic and recording a band, maybe there's a rock band, maybe there's a couple of guitars with some distortion and things going on. I would find that the SM7, that vocal sort of was able to sit out front of the band just a little bit, but then sometimes I'd re-record the vocal on a U67, like going for the high-end mic, and all of a sudden I'm like, why is the vocal getting lost in the track? Now I have to compress the shit out of it to try and bring it forward. Oh, but that doesn't work somehow, and it's interesting. It's a good one. It's a good thing too, because it's one of the more affordable
we tried
ones.
A couple other things. I think we put the SM7 up first, and then, it was like, okay, we heard that, like, try something else. I think we tried, we probably tried an Aston Stealth, which are also great. That's what I used for Joe on
That's
Idols.
Their SM7, right? It's kind of like
it's a dynamic microphone.
Yeah, with different.
It has a built-in preamp thing, but I don't know that I used it with the preamp. But again, like that can take really high SBL because Joe's just shouting a thing, and it's also I think it has like natural shock mounting in it because he was actually holding the mic, using it. And, another great sounding microphone for Kelly, the SM7 was better. And we probably also put up like an M49 or something tubey and fancy at one point just to hear it. And I think instantly it was just like, nope. It wasn't even like, oh, well, but it does have this. It's like, no, The SM7 was just clearly was a very easy decision to make. Everyone was in agreement.
The other reason I like the SM7 for tracking sessions in my studio is when my buddies and my band comes down to record and there's a lot of beer flowing and somebody falls into the SM7, it's not that big a deal. But if they fall into the U67, it doesn't go so well.
No, you're exactly right. You're exactly right. Maybe it's less intimidating too. I think there's something intimidating about a really big like shock mount and a hanging upside down microphone and, coming down kind of like this, like hanging down in front of your face, I think, there's a lot of people who just like to go handheld, and a lot of people like to go handheld in the control room.
OWC is your one-stop shop for flexible drive storage and connectivity solutions for your studio. The Mini Stack STX for your Mac Mini adds 2 additional drives over a universal SATA HDD SSD bay and an NVMe M.2 PCIe SSD slot, plus 3 additional Thunderbolt USB-C ports. Or the OWC Thunder Bay 4 chassis, built like a tank, gives you 4 hot swappable 2.5-inch RAID configurable drive bays, plus an extra Thunderbolt 3 jack for daisy chaining up to 5 devices. Or check out the OWC Gemini Thunderbolt 3 dock with 2 RAID configurable drives and 7 ports of connectivity, including a front-side SD card reader, 1 gig Ethernet, 2 USB 3.2 ports, and a dedicated display port, plus an additional backward-compatible Thunderbolt port. Get your studio connected with the Mini Stack STX, Thunder Bay 4, and Gemini Thunderbolt 3 dock at macsales.com/rockstars. Use the custom link in our show notes because it's a great way for you to help support this podcast. So thanks, Rockstars. Attention, all rock stars! iZotope has got you covered. With RX, Ozone, Neoverb, Nectar, and Vocal Synth, you'll have a collection of powerful apps and plugins that will help you get a professional sound in no time. Whether you're looking to clean up your vocal recordings with RX, master your tracks with Ozone, or add depth and ambience to your mixes with Neoverb, iZotope is your magic wand for awesomeness. Plus, with Nectar and Vocal Synth, you can easily add creative effects and unique textures to your vocals and instruments, from subtle mix enhancements to extreme sound design. iZotope takes your music and podcasts to the next level. Go to iZotope.com/rockstars and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any plugin purchase. Hey, Rockstars, we're back now for the second half of the show, the jam session. My guest today is Adam Greenspan, joining us from his studio in Los Angeles, from Slam Dance Cosmopolis, one of the coolest names for a studio I've ever heard. Adam, you ready to jam, dude?
Of course.
Awesome. Tell us about what else you're working on. What's some other projects that you're real excited about right now? And then also tell us a little bit more about what's new in the studio.
Let's see. Just had a record out actually last week. It's called Here It Is. It's a tribute to Leonard Cohen, out on Blue Note. And it was a record that I engineered and mixed for Larry Klein, who produced it.
Right on.
It's, he put together a really, really cool group of musicians for, the band. I had Bill Frisell on guitar, saxophone player named Manuel Wilkins, who's just absolutely amazing. And we had some really, really fantastic guest vocalists on the record. Iggy Pop, Sarah McLachlan, Nora Jones, Peter Gabriel, Nathaniel Ratliff, Gregory Porter, Mavis Staples.
Now, did you get a chance to have any of those artists on the mic yourself, or did
a few of them? Yes. Nathaniel actually, he did a version of "Famous Blue Raincoat," and it was the first song we actually recorded on the first day. And he was in town, so he came down and just sang it live with the band. And it happened to be raining that day too, which was really cool. We actually where Studio D at the Village, where we recorded that, there's a vocal booth that is kind of like, to get to it, you go out in this little little service dock with a door right on the corner on Santa Monica Boulevard. And I was just like, oh, it's raining. I was like, I got the assistant to open the door. I just took the vocal mic and just stuck it by the door and got a couple minutes of cars driving by in the rain. I don't know that they actually made it on the song. It was a little too on the nose, but it's definitely one of those like, oh, it's raining in LA. Let's
yeah.
And even just like between takes, to have the sound of rain in the control room, like while they were just setting up.
Yeah, so cool. Rockstars, if you're not familiar, it doesn't not often rain in Los Angeles.
Yeah,
it's like a real rare occurrence. I remember going to my favorite breakfast joint there, and which sadly I've forgotten the name of it. Maybe it'll come back to me years ago. But I remember sitting outside in this the very light mist sprinkle was happening, and I was like, oh, it feels so nice out here. It's so great. And they came out to rescue me because they're like, oh my God, do you want to come inside? I was like, wait, why would I come inside? It's not, it's like barely sprinkling.
Yeah.
But yeah. Well, that's cool, man. Yeah. And then I guess the other thing about cars in the rain in LA, there's probably a few high-speed car chases in there too, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of a thing.
That happens. But yeah, that record was really cool. Nathaniel's song is great. Gregory Porter actually was in LA, so recorded his vocal, his version of Suzanne, and Luciana Souza. She lives in LA. She's actually Larry Klein's wife, but she sang a song on there too, and so we had her in studio. Obviously, some people I would have loved to have been present for, but it's great just getting the email with like, oh, Iggy Pop's vocal. Let's hear it. Yeah. And yeah, he killed it. It's awesome.
What's some stuff about Leonard Cohen that you really enjoy?
I wasn't as familiar with his whole catalog until a little more recently. I mean, I kind of knew, I think my first introduction to Leonard Cohen must have been the movie Pump Up the Volume, where the song Everybody Knows is featured. Like both the original song is in the film, and then there's a cover, really fantastic cover of by Concrete Blonde on the soundtrack album. That's probably the earliest kind of introduction to Leonard Cohen. And then, a few of his songs were on some soundtracks in the 90s. I think Lost Highway and Natural Born Killers had some Leonard Cohen music in them. But, it's really kind of in working with Larry Klein recently, because he was a close friend of his, and we've actually done a few covers of his songs previously with other artists. I mean, it's so poetic, it's just as a lyricist. And even going back, like one of the songs we did was Avalanche, and that's actually him playing guitar on the original version of that like finger picked, like really fast, like this great guitar player too. But yeah, I mean, it's just, just really kind of timeless subject matter and real kind of timeless, but also of their time. Like a song like Famous Blue Raincoat, you can really you can hear the 60s in that song. It really sounds like the time. But
so with these special musicians playing on it, what were some things you remember deciding as far as like, how am I going to record the guitar? How am I going to record the saxophone, for example?
Well, the last record Larry had done, while I was doing Idols, he did an album with Melody Gardot that was engineered by Al Schmidt. And he had worked with Al, many times over the years. And, Al doesn't EQ anything to tape. And so, he asked me, like, if I'd be down to do that, like, just get a little deeper. And I mean, I was having a talk about this with someone on Instagram recently who was saying, like, oh, you're, the best engineers don't EQ or don't do anything, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, I mean, part of the reason why they do that is because they're also working with the best musicians and the best instruments. And so it's sort of like, it's a very privileged way to work, because that really only works when what you put the microphone in front of sounds good.
Right.
You know what I mean? And then with a good microphone and the correct placement, yes, it shouldn't need anything else. And so we kind of work to do that, but we did have that privilege of having fantastic players playing fantastically set up instruments, in a great sounding space. And so we had the ability to do that. And I think maybe the only thing with any EQ was the kick drum.
Mm-hmm.
Just to really give it some, weight. But, Studio D at the Village is so cool. They have this really cool reverb chamber, like right off the main room. And, you don't even send sub stuff. You just leave the door cracked a little bit and put a mic in there, and you're just getting it live through the door rather than, piping it through a PA. And so everything on that record is super, super, super natural as far as how I recorded it. Now, Bill Frisell, of course, utilizes a lot of effects in his playing, and that's really gorgeous. But I just had probably a ribbon mic and a 67 on his guitar and nothing. The saxophone, I was using this really cool Shure ribbon mic that is fairly new. It's like black with a red grill. I forget what it's called. And it's cool because the two sides of it are voiced a little bit different. There's like a brighter side and a darker side. I don't know if you're able to look up what that mic's
I'm
called.
looking at it right now. Is that the KSM 353?
I think so, yeah. Is it like black and red?
Whoops, nope. I'm looking at that. Pulled up the wrong one. My bad, rock stars. Hold on, here we go. KSM 313 NE dual voice ribbon mic.
Yeah.
It's probably just black and red. Yep.
Yeah. And so, I actually turned it around to the brighter side and he's playing into that. And there's a little bit of Valhalla vintage verb, plate in the mix. And there is no EQ or compression on that microphone, even into the final mix.
Right on. So just great dynamic playing.
Yeah, just incredibly dynamic playing. Obviously, there's some automation, just riding the volume a little more. There might be a few songs where he takes a solo and I maybe add a subtle EQ curve just to make it step forward just because it's a solo. But I mean, for the most part, like it just sounded great. I was really, really impressed with that microphone.
That's fun to do sessions like that where you really just try and capture a really great natural recording too. Mm-hmm. Did you find yourself using omnis in different places or cardioids?
Mostly cardioids. Again, like, I don't even know that I had a room mic in there with manual. I think kind of because it was a ribbon with a figure 8, there was already a bit of, it sounded a little roomier because you had that back, maybe some reflections were coming in the back side. So it just had a really fantastic natural sound. It didn't sound too boxy and close, but it didn't sound too washed out. And, just with a real simple plate reverb plug-in, and it just sounded gorgeous. I wish I could say more about the mics I used with the different singers, but having that, most of them didn't live in LA, so it was just sending them backing tracks, and just they would send us their vocals back.
I wonder if that gives you a situation where the singer is more likely to use a mic that they personally like because they're in the process too.
Most of these singers are probably so well established that, I think some of them had home studios and recorded themselves.
Yeah.
And some had engineers and some went into studios. I think it was everything was done differently, but, I think kind of I created a vibe and just really trying to focus on the vocals. I mean, that's really what Leonard's music's about, especially in this context,
That's very cool. What are some other recent projects that you've been excited about? So, stuff that's going on. You mentioned Paolo.
Oh, yeah. So a record that we may have even spoken about on the last show, because it took a little bit of time for that record to finally come out. But it has just been nominated for a Latin Grammy for Best New Artist.
Nice.
The artist's name is Cande y Paulo. It's again, there's a lot of it's a collection of covers and standards that they did, about half in English, half in Spanish. Some are original Spanish language songs, but most even some, a lot of things have been translated to Spanish. But they are from Argentina, somewhere I think not Buenos Aires. Like they're from somewhere a little more rural, but just a duo of fantastic musicians. She sings and plays bass, Paulo plays piano, and just a really fantastic sounding duo. Super proud of them. Just didn't really see that coming, and I guess sometimes the way these things work, like the nomination years are weird. So a record that you think like, oh, wait, that's still like, we're still in the nomination year for that.
Right,
okay.
Right.
So, it's just these couple projects I've done that are, they're so different from my usual thing, like Idols, Block Party, that's the world that I'm kind of most, known to work in.
And so you recorded these guys or mixed or?
Yeah, recorded and mixed.
Recorded and mixed. So what were some decisions you remember making about the piano and what kind of bass? We're talking about electric bass?
No, she played upright bass.
Okay, cool.
Upright bass. I mean, I think there was maybe some electric bass on the record as well, but mostly she plays upright. And both of these albums actually featured upright. The Leonard Cohen one was upright, top to bottom.
How do you like to record an upright?
Actually, I have a really fantastic tube DI. It's made by a company called JT Amplification here in LA. Really great sounding tube DI. And this player on the Leonard Cohen album had a pickup already in his bass. It was a combo of that tube DI. Again, no EQ, no compression on that, but the tubes were naturally compressing a little bit. You could see the waveform compared to the microphone, and the microphone was much more dynamic, whereas this tube DI, I was probably driving it a little bit. And again, using it to kind of more fill out the mid-range, just to kind of, this upright bass can be a very expansive record, and its low end is really low. And so it can be very tricky to get upright bass to translate on smaller systems just because of the nature of that particular instrument doesn't have that mid-range that electric bass does, which allows it to kind of cut through. So
that's a nice way of saying it's a real pain in the ass.
It's a really hard instrument to record. It really is. And it has to be a really good one. And I think for a microphone, I know I didn't use a 67 because we didn't have any that week because U2 were recording in the building and they had taken every 67 in the place.
That's funny.
I don't think I ever had to bring so many of my own microphones to the village.
That's great.
I might have actually used a V11.
Really?
It's very
upright?
possible.
Cool.
Yeah. It's very, very possible.
Adam Audio introduces the all-new A-Series line of monitors, featuring the XART accelerated ribbon tweeter design, built-in DSP-based room correction, and speaker voicings, allowing you to customize your Adam Audio monitors to fit your control room. The A-Series will rock in any studio. Small studio spaces or immersive multi-speaker configurations are perfect for the A4V or the new A7V, the next generation of the incredibly popular A7X. Mid-sized rooms and narrow spaces will love the low profile of the A44H, expanding on the A7V sound, or the A77H, a true three-way midfield monitor delivering rich, spacious sound. And bigger studios will love the A8H, a three-way speaker and the pinnacle of the A-Series that delivers extremely accurate sound required for critical listening environments. Get the Adam Audio monitors and subwoofers that are right for your studio with an extended 5-year warranty at adamaudio.com. Every studio needs a good vintage mic for that classic warm sound. Whether you're looking for those airy highs, sweet mid-range, or silky low end, a good vintage mic can put the magic in your mixes. So it's no wonder vintage mics have been loved and praised by thousands of engineers for decades. The JZ Microphone Vintage Series are built by hand in Latvia using only the best electronic components and feature the patented Golden Drop capsule design for great detail and richness of tone that will bring that classic vintage vibe to your studio and be a real workhorse for your sessions. This time, our friends at JZ Microphones have come up with a special offer just for you, rock stars. Use the coupon ROCKSTAR to get 40% off the Vintage Series mics V67, V47, or V12, the mic you're hearing right now. Plus, they'll throw in a free shock mount worth $120 for a limited time at jzmic.com. Where are some places, we don't have to pretend like there's an ultimate upright bass miking, because it might be a little different for everybody, but what are some good starting go-to places to try sticking a mic on an upright bass for the rock stars?
Not too close. I would do something, use a large diaphragm condenser, maybe a tube. I probably would have used a 67 had one been available to me. That's what I've used in the past. But this sound I got for this record was great. So yeah, I would probably have to look at I'm sure it says in my Pro Tools session. But yeah, I think it might have been a V11.
And would you put that sort of,
I would go out from the sound hole, but I would come out from the sound hole, but fairly far back, like, a couple feet, 2 or 3 feet back, because that low end needs some distance to develop. But also you just get a little more. Which sound
hole? The one on the high string side or the low string side? Like left or right? If you're the bass player, I guess.
To be honest, I don't even remember. I mean, I think it might have been the high string side, just because it was more convenient to reach from that side, because I think he had a music stand on his, on his right side, left if you're looking at the player. I honestly,
we asked the super nerdy questions on this podcast.
I don't even,
because these are like the real things that go through my head when I'm engineering.
Right,
like, well,
sure.
Which slide should I
Some
put
of
on,
it's just trial and error, and
well, I agree. The
certainly
DI
have recorded a lot more electric bass than acoustic bass in my life, and that's it's definitely it can be a tricky instrument to record for sure.
That was a female bass player and singer singing
Kande,
and playing
yes.
bass at the same time.
Right. Well, so the Kande record was recorded at Sunset Sound. That almost definitely would have been a 67 on her bass, and that probably didn't have a DI on it. That probably, from memory, I don't think it did. So that would have just been a 67. Sometimes I'll do something like a KM84 at the fretboard. Now, of course, you also have to think about like someone playing like jazz upright bass and someone playing rockabilly upright bass.
Totally different things.
It's like two totally different things. And you definitely got to get the fretboard if you're doing rockabilly, or you're missing half the part.
Yeah, it's like half the drum part, in fact.
Exactly. Half the drum part is the clacking of the bass strings. How
about piano on the Kande Ipalo session?
My go-to for piano is usually like, I like C12As because you can get them in there a little better. You can manipulate them a little better than like a proper C12. But I'll use C12 sometimes. Like both of these records, because piano was featured, such a featured instrument, the piano was isolated so that the lid could be open and we could get some, room mic in there. So I may have used like actual C12s on one of those, and then maybe C12As on the other. And then usually like some kind of like ribbon underneath just to, you know, it's just, you just want it for low end, so it's cool if it's already kind of dark and just it's a little flavor. You know, especially if like a piano is going to be a real prominent part of a song, like 75% of a song is piano. Obviously, if you're trying to fit something, and these were both grand pianos, if you're trying to fit something as like a part into a rock song, uprights are great. And then honestly, you can get away with a 57 on an upright if it's something that you're just sticking into a rock and roll song that's already kind of dense.
Yeah. Hearing a piano.
I find if I only have a grand piano for something like that, I end up EQing out so much of the bottom of it just to get it to sit in the mix. You might as well just start with a piano that already sounds that way.
Yeah, yeah. When you're talking about the ribbon underneath the grand, rather, how do we picture that? Is that so? Ribbon's figure eight, so it's looking up towards the bottom of the piano,
looking
and
up, and then
floor.
like honestly, like you can completely eliminate the the reflections from the backside by just setting it on the floor. Put it on a towel.
Really? All the way down.
Literally just set it on the floor. Yeah, it doesn't have to be too close. Or, you know, maybe a pillow or maybe prop it up a little bit. But yeah, I mean, especially a heavy ribbon, like, you know, I usually use like an RCA 44, you know, something that's just going to be real old and dark and heavy and also doesn't like to be positioned. Like, you know, do it a favor and just set it on something. You know, it doesn't even need a stand. Just, you know, a milk crate with a towel on top and just set it on top of there.
That's cool. Yeah, I've never even tried that. I've never tried using a ribbon just laying on something. Mm-hmm. That's something I'll definitely have to try. That's cool. I mean, I think my brain would have thought like, oh, that won't work. But then now I'm thinking about it, I'm like, well, yeah, it's going to work. The ribbon's still inside the mic. It can still move around. Mm-hmm. Should sound cool. Yeah. All right. Well, so let's see here. You've done a ton of really interesting records. Your playlist is awesome. Rockstars, please click through. It's in the show notes, so go listen to Adam's work because it's a lot of great rock bands. Like, you know, I think this is spanning across your career. We've got, you know, like Rage Against the Machine is in there, Black Rebel Motorcycle Club, the Yeah Yeah Yeahs, Supergrass. Peaches was a fun track in there too. Mm-hmm. But tell us a little bit about, you know, some of the ways that you approach making records. Do you like to have a console? Do you think it's important to have a console when I mean, that's on your website. When you land there, you see a console and what looks like, I think 1073, you know, mic pre's and stuff. How important is that kind of stuff toward the back end of a record? Do you feel like there's any difference between starting a record with a console and a sort of a big elaborate studio setup and ending in a computer? Like, how do you balance those things?
Yeah. So, I mean, recording, I mean, you need a console most part just because you just need a lot of inputs. Especially, you know, like I said, if you are recording live, you know, it's just a lot of inputs. And so it would be a pretty weird situation to not have a console, but still somehow have all those inputs. That would be a lot of outboard gear and, you know, probably just simpler to have a console. Plus, if you're in a studio that has a big enough space to record a live band, it's going to have a console. But I'm completely in the box now mixing.
Okay.
On occasion, we will go somewhere, and once mixes are finished, sometimes run things through a console and an analog stereo bus process like we've used, you know, kind of in the before times. But honestly, I'm doing that less and less. I'm finding plugins and processors in the digital realm that are just so good. Plus, you know, just the sound of records is evolving, and I'm really wanting things to be really, you know, aggressive and in your face, and some of those processes to do that are digital, even if they're emulating analog in some way. And I'm just, you know, it's become less and less of a thing for me to, you know, still want to go out and, you know, reprint my mixes in the analog realm. We didn't do it with Bloc Party. I haven't done it. Actually, the last record we did that with was Idols. Haven't done it since.
do you find that there's let's see, how do I even ask this question? When you're moving into the box, do you feel like there were like last walls you had to break through? Was it like at first
absolutely.
it was like, oh, you got to still break out through some analog thing, and then eventually you're like, oh, I don't need that, or oh, I don't need an outboard compressor, or what are some thoughts about that kind of stuff?
Well, I was never really doing like the hybrid mixing thing. It's only just now that I am finding like certain hardware things that I do like. Like I bought an H3000 earlier this year, which is interesting because it's a digital processor, but I guess maybe Eventide doesn't want to cannibalize their entire hardware business. But the H3000 plugin is really limited as far as, compared to what the hardware unit can do. And there's just presets in the hardware that don't exist in the plugin because the algorithm isn't there. So, I mean, that's something I'm using more now, just because I like it. Like I said earlier, I use a lot of pedals when I mix. I just find it to be really fun. I mean, as far as gear goes, they can be relatively inexpensive. Of course, there's like $500 or $600 pedals out there, but it's certainly less expensive than buying like studio type outboard gear, and the pedals tend to be a lot more unique. Maybe they're a one trick pony, but for $150, I'll buy a one trick pony if it does a cool trick. And I'll just. I set up my studio recently. I'm using like the Focusrite Red range interfaces. The the Red 16 or 16 line, and the R1 controller, which has Dante and stuff. And I'm really happy I went with the 16 channel interface because I kind of have all the outboard gear I do have is just up and ready to go on hardware inserts. Like I don't even have to patch anything. So I have two, this unit called the Pedal Punk, which is really cool. It's essentially like a reamp box and DI kind of in one. And it has, transformer in the output and an op amp on the input. So either end can be driven with, slightly different characteristics of its own. In fact, the box is a really, really cool saturation device. I found on vocals, I'm really loving it as a vocal kind of warmer distortion. My friend Sonny DePerry, who told me about the unit, like he does the same thing. And I just literally have a, 3-inch cable with the output back into its input. And I'm just using the sound of this box. It sounds beautiful on vocals. But it makes it really easy to like just get out to a pedal and right back in. It lets the pedal see the type of level it wants to see, and then bumps the output right back up. But I mean, one of my favorites, I just had Earthquaker modded one of their Afterneath pedals for me, because the original pedal, the mix doesn't completely eliminate the dry sound. So, you could imagine like in a send and return situation that gets a little bit phasey, especially if it's out of the box. So they built me a special one with just like a dry kill switch that'll just like, boom, there your dry signal is just gone.
That's cool.
So yeah, I mean, I love that thing. It's just its own unique sound, There's a lot of like bands that are doing pedal collaborations with builders now. I just got pedal called Screen Violence that is made by Old Blood Noise and the band Churches. Really cool, like distortion and like modulated reverb delay thing, and you can switch which one comes first. It's cool to like distort the reverb. That's a really, really cool vibe. Put the distortion second. That's a really, really cool sound. What else? The band Deaf Heaven have a pedal called Infinite Granite that they put out with Alexander. That thing's really cool. Literally, like I bought one off Reverb, and like the day it came, I was already using it on a mix. I was just like, this thing's rad. Man, what else? Some of my favorites. Not so much a mix thing, but like on the pedal nerd tip, there's a pedal called the Limelight that is made by, I think it's called Experimental Audio Research. And that was a collaboration with them and a band on Epitaph from here in LA called Touche Amore. And that is the best guitar overdrive. It is awesome. So good. I bought a second one. I retired my Keeley modded Blues Driver when I bought that pedal. I gave that to Nick Launay. This thing, I mean, I don't know if I'll ever track a guitar without that pedal plugged in again. It sounds so good.
That's awesome. So if I was to say this back to you, you find it useful to just set up your interface where it's already feeding certain outboard things that you might want to use. So you don't have to plug something in other than
right.
You grab the guitar pedal that you want to try out and there's a cable ready for you. Go into it.
Exactly. All I do is plug in the pedal and there's already like a power supply back behind, where the thingy is, and it's just ready to boop. I don't really have that much outboard gear that would really be mix ready. I mean, the H3000, I've got a couple other little like weird compressors. You ever heard of the Atomic Dyno Ray or Atomosonic Dyno Ray?
No, and that's what, a compressor you said?
Yeah, it's like a tweaked out Shure level lock. Like it's an absolute like destruction unit.
Oh wow.
Like it's
nice.
not subtle. It's not subtle at all. I got it because of the name. Like I will literally buy anything with Adam in the name because, that's what I go by.
Right.
I'm actually waiting on a pedal from Vaterin. They did a atomizer version of their harmonic percolator, and that is like en route to me now. So
do you find that the most, like, are there certain types of pedals where you might think, oh, I'm going to go out to a pedal to find a sound? Not types of pedals, but I mean, like, do you find that distortions are one of those things because it's so complex that it turns you on over a plugin as an option, or like certain delays or something, or phasers?
I guess so far to this point, other than using just the pedal punk on its own for its own kind of saturation, I'm definitely doing it more with like reverbs and delays, just because, they just tend to, like, pedals just tend to have like a real specific flavor. Like I said, even if it's a one-trick pony, if it's a cool trick, then like it's worth it for sure.
Yeah.
Honestly, distortions, I have so many distortion pedals, but I also have so many distortion plugins, and some of the plugins are really rad.
Yeah.
And sometimes you'll just accidentally come across something that isn't even meant to be a distortion, even if it's a plugin. But because the modeling of some analog thing is so good, like even its distortion, like just as an experiment on a song I was mixing last week, like I usually use the Helios EQs I really like on guitars, the UAD Helios EQ. And it's always the same setting, 700 hertz in the mid-range, 400 hertz in the bottom end, and then I just add it to taste. The top end, it's like fixed at 10K, and it's fairly large jumps. So I tend to use something else as well. And in this case, I was just really curious to see what would happen. I was like, what if I just turn the input up? And oh my God, it sounded so cool. Like totally thrashed it and distorted. I was like, okay, well, this isn't going to be my main guitar sound. I'm going to treat my guitars like normal, but I'm going to send the two chorus heavy guitars to a Helios that is just distorting them and mix a little bit of that in. Like, yeah, it was too over the top I couldn't just make that be the thing. But man, mixed in, that sounded cool. And I just discovered that last week, and it's not really what you would expect to do with that plugin.
Yeah, cool. So it's like perfect for just a little bit extra, a little extra.
Yeah, and I don't mean a little bit extra. I mean, this was like full on distorted. Now, what's weird is that plugin, has a mic line switch. And I switched it to, I was like, well, if it sounds that good distorting the line input, what about switch it to mic? What does that sound like? Actually, I liked what it did on line better.
Mm-hmm.
Who knows? Whatever. It's
just
who
some
knows? Buttons on a screen. It's, whatever sounds cool.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me of one. I remember one of the plugins we found years ago that sounded amazing when you pushed the hell out of it was the Telray delay.
Mm-hmm.
It's just one of those ones that's been around for ages. I don't even remember who makes that one. It's just one of the bomb factories or something. It's just
I think it's was one of the stock Pro Tools plugins.
But just turn that input, just crank the input, and it's got a great distortion. Howdy, rock stars. Do you ever feel like you're spending all this time watching YouTube videos, trying out mixing tricks, and tweaking version after version of your mixes, but it's just not getting you anywhere? Have you ever wished that you could have more of a simple and straightforward process for creating a pro mix that wouldn't take you years to learn? Look, what if you could have a Grammy-winning mix engineer who understood all of your mixing struggles and could actually coach you through them? If these are any of the questions that you're struggling with, then the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass is just for you. Now you can discover this proven step-by-step mixing system from Grammy-winning mixer Craig Alvin for consistently creating pro-quality mix from your home studio that will sound amazing everywhere. Listen to this quote from one of the students. Absolutely the most informative and helpful block of information and mentoring on the mix process I've ever been a part of. It was like sitting behind a mix engineer for years, watching and picking up tips along the way, condensed into a 6 to 7 hour session. That's from David P. Look, if you already understand the basics of mixing, but you're ready to take your mixes to Grammy-winning quality, then go to ultimatemixingmasterclass.com and check it out. In fact, I'm so confident that you're going to love this, that if you can't get a great sounding mix within 30 days, just send me an email and I'll give you a full refund, no questions asked. So go ahead and take your mixes to the next level like you know you want to at ultimatemixingmasterclass.com. Just to reiterate your point of the one-trick pony, it's not that we need to make an excuse for the one-trick pony. I think it's that sometimes we need to remind ourselves that 1,000 trick anything is just 1,000 things we have to listen to now to look for a good sound. So how does that help? It's it doesn't always help to have everything do everything.
Right. Also, if you know what something's going to do, you have a sound in mind because you're oh, this thing makes that sound. The afterneath, I don't even know what that pedal does, if I'm being honest. It is blurry delays that sound like reverbs. And there's a knob that sounds really cool if you turn it while stuff's playing because you can change the pitch. And it's just super spooky. And I just love the vibe. I've always loved that pedal. I mean, I've had one of those for a long time. And I actually attempted, I had used it, the old one, in a mix with a little bit of dry sound mixed in. And I just dealt with it. But I was just you know what? They make a Eurorack version of that pedal that comes with a dry kill button. And I was okay, so it's obviously doable. I would just like to encourage more pedal builders who make, time-based effects. Make sure your pedal can go all the way wet because you're kind of selling yourself short if it doesn't. Pedals can do a lot more things than people think they can,
Yeah. So the pedal punk, that's the name of the one you were talking about. That's the thing that's interfaces, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's made by a dude here in LA. Very cool.
Had you tried a bunch of other ways of doing that too? I mean, can we just? I
mean, I'm just done it old school. And sometimes it's fine. I just find this it just helps balance the levels. I find you do it old school, you end up you're turning your Pro Tools send down to almost nothing.
Right. I've done that.
What I mean? In order to keep blasting out your pedal, yeah. And this is just this just makes it easy and it does sound good every time. And I'm coming back in on a mic pre, because it's kind of like a DI box. And, I can use this for reamping too.
Yeah.
I can use it as a reamp box. You don't have to use it both directions at one time. And for that matter, I can probably use it as a DI box. I mean, it's, it has a send and return, but you can use either. It's a very, very useful product because technically it's doing both.
Have you gotten into modular synths and that kind of stuff ever? Is that your world at all?
You know what? I won't mess with modular synths. It's too much.
It's too much. Too many options.
Too much. problem with synths is that they can be like, it's great if a player has one and they know their way around it and they plan some stuff out. But like, if you're just like, oh, I want to put some keyboards on something, and now you got to get out patch cables and just like, I want synths that have presets.
Yeah.
And I think we're in like the renaissance of synths, because now we're in the era of like, you know, Moog and like Sequential making fantastic sounding pure analog synths, but with modern capabilities and modern sensibilities and presets, and they sound great, and like they only go out of tune when you want them to, you know. And I honestly, like, I'm way more into modern analog synths than like vintage ones. I mean, it's just like, they're more interesting. You can do more with them. They're not as expensive. They work. And man, I'm pretty sure we've heard everything that a Mini Moog can do.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. Like, that's a cool synth for its time, but you haven't heard that synthesizer do anything new in generations.
Nice. What about digital synths? Have you been intrigued by some of the stuff that's possible just in the computer, or do you find that there's a benefit to using a dedicated keyboard?
I use a lot of the stuff. You know what I really love is the ARP Solina plugin by Arturia. And I think someone else makes one as well, but I love the Arturia one. I find like, I'll actually sometimes, even as a mixer, I'll add some real subtle, like just kind of high, like tension notes with that. And it's just like, it's so emotional. It's such a cool, emotional sound. Like there's a song I did years ago with the Veils called Iodine and Iron. And it was a very, very natural sounding song. And we always intended to have real strings on it. But we did guide strings with the ARP Solina plugin. And then we had Eric Gorfain from the section come in and play like a few layers. He did some violin and viola, I think. And with the idea that was going to, you know, we were going to replace all these fake strings. And in the end, we used all of the synth strings and only one top line of real violin to give it that air of realness. But there's just like a mood that the Solina conjures that's a little more melancholy. And it also tied the song into the album better, because the album was quite urban and shiny, rainy, black. And like this song, and I use this terminology a lot, like in instruments, like where does an instrument take you? Like a lot of times a piano takes you indoors. If you're trying to give an image of like an outdoor, you know, sprawling natural thing, the second you put piano on that, it's taking you indoors, you know. And this was a very urban, gritty record, you know. I call it like black and shiny, you know. It's like, you know, neon lights reflecting off wet pavement kind of vibe, you know what I mean? And like the real strings sounded brown, you know what I mean? Just the color didn't work, you know what I mean? And the Solina worked. I mean, I had a similar thing with a song I was mixing recently that was also kind of like a gothy, like almost industrial thing. It reminded me of the band Curve. And there was at the outro, there was a piano just like ding, 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 ding. And I was like, no. You know what I mean? It's just like, it was like rhythmically, I see what it was doing. It was like, again, it was like a tension note, and it was just one note, and it was, you know, almost like a Iggy Pop, like I Want to Be Your Dog, like just ding, 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 ding. And it's just like, man, it's just the wrong color. You know what I mean? It's the wrong color for this sound, this song. You know what I mean? It's just like, it's kind of taking me back to like a saloon, you know what I mean? And like this again is like a very like black and shiny. And now all of a sudden I'm in a dusty saloon.
It's interesting.
Like,
do you feel like you're one of the people who you can recognize colors? Like, do you feel like you're somebody who could literally put colors together too? Or are you more like, you know, I find that I have a tough time sometimes assembling an outfit, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
But I can recognize when somebody does a really great job of putting colors together. In other words.
No, I probably can. Yeah. I think I'm good at that, and like kind of just aesthetic things. I mean, I like to cook as well. I mean, I'm not so much of like, say, a visual artist as in like drawing or painting. I painted a little bit as a kid, but like, yeah, definitely like other things like putting flavors together. I think I'm good at. Like, I'm really good at identifying flavors when I eat something. You know, it's like, unless it's just something super over the top, like I can almost make anything I've ever eaten, you know, like, unless it involves some utensil that I can't fit in my tiny little kitchen.
Nice.
You know?
Yeah. I like, when I'm cooking, I like to just smell the different, spices, you know, and determine what I'm putting. I'm afraid to say sometimes I make a lot of veggie chili here, and a lot of times I just end up putting the same stuff in there anyway. But I like sort of concocting it that way, and I think that's how I think about it in the studio too. Just like what feels like it might be a good fit sonically. I'm thinking about like somebody assembling bold, wild colors of just Sean Everett's going to be on the show again pretty soon. And like the recent photos I've been seeing of him with his outfit for the Mix with the Masters is just so awesome. It's so over the top.
He rules. Do you know John X? John X?
No, not yet.
Has he ever been on the show?
Not yet.
He's another one like just famous for his outfits. His dear friend. He's like one of the first people I worked with in LA. He was actually a client at Westlake. And so I started, I met him like socially through some common friends while I was on staff there at Westlake. And, you know, he and Danny Saber used to work together a lot. And
cool.
They were like, yeah, you work at Westlake, don't you? I was like, yeah. And they're like, oh, dude, we'll request you when we come in. Cause I wasn't a assistant yet. I was still a runner, but I had already done a lot of engineering work in San Francisco before moving to LA. So I moved through Westlake really fast, like partly because of that. You know, most people there were like right out of school. And I already had like quite a bit of experience under my belt. So I kind of jumped over a lot of people, and then just by chance had made friends with some of the clients outside of work. And they just started requesting me like before I was even officially an assistant.
Well, another name you mentioned was Manny Nieto. And he was actually on my first podcast before this one. And it's a reminder, I need to see if Manny might like to come back on the show. He was talking about traveling through China with a backpack and recording all the local bands. And I'm like, that's the coolest shit I've ever heard, you know? So shout out to you, Manny. We're going to have you on the show.
Yeah, you got to get Manny on here.
Right on.
Manny's really cool. You know, you see each other every once in a while, you know, because, you know, as you know, Rob Schnaff's studio is in the same building as me. So I see him all the time. And, you know, Manny's turned me on to a lot of cool stuff. Heiserman microphones, Eric Heiserman. Oh man, he is making some, I got to give a shout out to Eric as well. I think most people probably know him for his like U47 and his clones, but honestly, again, like, and they are really good, but honestly, his proprietary microphone, the Type 19, unbelievable sounding microphone. Unbelievable. I had a couple of those for the Block Party record too. I used them on guitars most. Actually, I used one of them on toms because she had 3 toms and I only had 2 V11s at the moment. So, you know, I know Rob is like using that Type 19 on kick drum like exclusively now. It's like his new favorite kick drum mic.
That's cool.
So I don't own a pair of those yet, but they are probably next on my list of acquisitions.
What are some mics that you do like to use on kick?
I usually use an RE20 on the inside, FET 47 on the outside. I keep it fairly simple. I'm curious to try the whole tunnel thing. I've never really done the tunnel thing. I might do that on my next record just for fun, just to see. I don't know.
I think I've explored it and tried a little bit, and you know, it's it can be interesting. I guess the question is, what would I be trying to accomplish if I was to do that? And I guess it would be listen to that FET 47 or the condenser in front of the kick, and you know, what's getting in there that I don't want to get in there, and does the tunnel block it out? I guess, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I've never done it. I'm just, you know, something new to try. You never know.
Yeah.
I mean,
We're all about trying new stuff.
Yeah. I don't really use like a sub kick, like the speaker thing too often, because I feel like you can't really tweak that sound and you can very easily like recreate that. I use a SansAmp plugin and a gate to kind of recreate that same type of thing, except you can dial in, you can just get precise with just how much low end, where do you want the frequency of the low end? Like, do you want it to sound more like mid-range distortion, or do you want it to sound more like a sub? Like, so many things you can do. Also, if people, on my Instagram, I actually posted a picture of all my SansAmp kick drum settings. Like, I just have and they're just like, exactly, like number one is more subby, and then it's like, okay, more industrial mid-range distortion, and then some of them you'll see actually have some specific song titles on them too. So if people recognize the song title, be like, okay, add that to your kick drum, and that's that sound.
Okay, awesome. There's a project for you, rock stars. Go to Instagram.
I've been trying to really like do more stuff. I've been trying to like utilize that more and like share tips and like make it more like work related and like just kind of interactive, like, give some stuff back.
What's your Instagram?
I think it's ADamG.
Yep, I'm seeing it right there.
Yeah, A.Adam.G.
There's a bunch of
Adam,
imposters
A-T-O-M.
out there. Never mind the imposters, rock stars. It's A.Adam.G.
Yeah.
And go check out some
Adam
cool
spelled
techniques.
like A-T-O-M.
Find the worm. This episode is sponsored by Recording Studio Rockstars Academy. Are you ready to take your recording, mixing, and mastering to the next level and make your best record ever? Then visit the Academy to find the course that's right for you. Want to record killer drums in your studio? Then check out Rockstars of Drums to learn how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with a professional Nashville session drummer in a Grammy-winning studio. Or if you're ready to start mastering your own records at home, then check out Rockstars of Mastering, where I walk you through exactly how I mastered my own record, Skadoosh, the soundtrack to this podcast, in fact, using nothing but plugins in PreSonus Studio One. These techniques would work for you no matter what DAW you're using right now. And if mixing is your focus, then check out my free course, Mix Master Bundle, where I show you how to mix using stock and free plugins in Pro Tools. Plus, you get a look at how I recorded everything in my studio and multi-track downloads to practice your mixing and even include in your mix portfolio if you want. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started now, or look for the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. So before we close out here, as we're getting near the end, talk to us a little bit about the mixing in the box, because we always like to talk about mixing. What are some things about like your, are there any sort of standard routing things that you think of and might set up right away? What about your mix bus? Are there some things that you tend to?
Yeah. So I have a template that, I really like, I think a lot of people ask for like, just raw audio files and stuff because they want to make it fast to just, import into their own thing. But even though it can sometimes be a little time consuming at the beginning, I like to get, if someone has a Pro Tools session of their rough mix or whatever mix that they've already sent me, I like to have that because I want to be able to just move forward. If they've done one good thing on the rough mix, like one cool thing, I don't want to have to try and recreate it. Yeah. Sometimes I might change everything, but it's like, okay, dude, your bass distortion, that sounds cool. I love what you've done, especially since if you send me raw tracks, I'm going to have just a clean DI. I already love the distortion. Like, I don't want to have to like start over and then like try something else. But like, oh, but I actually like what they did on their, on their rough better. Like, I don't even know what it is, but it sounds cool. So I like to move forward, but then, I'll like immediately put it into my template, which has, it has subgroups for all of, the various, stems. And I utilize that. It makes it super easy to make stems. I just literally, I highlight my subgroups and a selection, and offline, like, boom, there's my stems, done. I don't print stems with my stereo bus processing. I think stereo bus processing is irrelevant if the stems aren't mixed, especially like compression, anything dynamic based. It's like, it's pointless. Also, back in the day when we were mixing analog, you would actually, do stems, through the board, through the stereo bus, because, that's what you had. But the idea of like needing stems for the purpose of actually like recalling the song, you don't need that anymore. You know what I mean? Just open the session again.
Right. So the stems are more of an archive, a possibility.
Yeah, it's more of an archive.
Other things,
and if say someone wants to do like a remix, well, then they're gonna do their stereo bus to their remix anyway. So I utilize the Slate virtual console on every track and every bus. It's just set to API, and it's just the stock settings on API. That's the desk that I'm most comfortable mixing on. So it's just, to me, it's just like, it's the perfect balance. Like the Neve model that they have can be just a little too mushy in the bottom, although it's nice and warm and big in the bottom. And, the SSL, you can hear that aggressiveness, but like it's a little small sounding. The API is just like, to me, it's just the ultimate. And I don't even bother with changing settings on it. It just does its thing. It, just like you can't change the settings on a console as far as like the internal components of the console. The op amps inside the console, they do what they do, and you can't do it more or less. It's just how loud something is. So if I'm hitting it too hard, I will turn something down. There's no reason to change the plugin, So it's just kind of a set it and forget it thing.
Let me ask you a question there. So that would mean that there would be a console plugin that goes on each individual track and one that goes on the stereo bus itself,
So there's two different versions of the plugin. There's like a channel version and a bus version. And I don't really know what the difference is under the hood. I guess it's just kind of where on the console they modeled that, saturation curve. So I utilize them the way, is intended. I have the channel versions on all my channels, and I have the bus version on my subgroups and on my stereo bus. Okay. So that basically, all of that routing is going through that type of console emulation, just like it would on a real console. You would have those different bus stages that would all be hitting an op amp on an API.
And would you think about that as being the first slot of our plugins or the last slot of our plugins? Is there a way
I do it first. The only thing that I'll put before it is like if I'm tuning something or if I'm using noise reduction on something, if I'm doing some very specifically digital, maybe problem correcting type of thing. Just because a lot of those plugins, you lose a little warmth. So I've never really tested this, but my theory is that, well, if I can do that before hitting the console emulation, then maybe the console emulation will bring back some of what that process may have lost.
Right.
Yeah, but for the most part, that's just the first thing. Just like if I were, that would be the first thing if I was mixing analog. It would come in and it would hit the input of the channel before I was able to EQ or do anything else to it. So, so a lot of it too is just like trying to emulate that analog work, at least analog signal flow. I mean, the workflow is very different, not having a full console laid out in front of you. But, I have an Avid S1 now. I'm kind of getting used to it. Like it's a little funky. I've been meaning to just kind of spend a little more time learning it in some downtime rather than just like limping through, like just, but it does some cool stuff. I mean, I've definitely utilized it. But the reality is like, you always see photographs of guys at a console with like every finger on a fader. Like that's so posed. No one actually does that, Like, I'm touching 8 faders at once, and I know what they're all doing, and I can focus on all 8 of these faders. Well, if you really needed to move 8 faders at once, you'd group them and you'd use one fader to group them all.
Right. And you can't see my toes right now, but they're on mute switches that I've custom designed. Exactly.
Like, you don't really need. I mean, honestly, the best thing about work mixing in a proper studio is just the monitoring. If it's a room that sounds really good. But, once you get your monitoring done in your, really happening in your own room, it's like, I know what this room sounds like now. I'm just, less and less needing to reference. Like I only have one set of monitors. I don't have anything else.
What
that
are
I
you
listen
using now?
on. Adam P22As. It's an old model of Adams. And I have an Adam, the sub 12. I'm using a subwoofer for the first time. It's just this room really needs it. And I will listen in my car, but otherwise, I don't really do a lot of work on headphones. I just don't really like wearing headphones, I like the sound of sound through the air.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm using the S1s as well. And I'm like you, I feel like I'm learning them. A couple of things that I dig about it is those extra 4 programmable buttons down on the lower right, the custom ones. I put stuff on there that I wish Pro Tools already had. Like I can hit one and just like disable all solos in the session, that kind of thing.
Oh yeah. So I actually have some of my soft keys set up for that because I've been using the iPad app too.
Oh, yeah.
So I set up like soft keys, but yeah, I have like clear solo is one of them. Actually, you know what my favorite hotkey is? Faders off. Because when I'm not using the thing, it's so annoying to have this thing sitting next to you every time you scroll. It's like,
oh, right.
Faders jumping around when you're not using them. It's like, shut up. That is so
and
annoying.
Even worse is I got one fader that doesn't jump around. And then I'm like, is that fader broken or do I need to go into the settings?
Right.
I'm trying to think about a mix. Well, very cool. Well, again, thank you for being on the podcast with us. We're kind of hitting the end here, and I've asked you this question last time, but I'll ask it again. This is our hypothetical question. We get to take the Wayback Studio machine, and you go back and find a young version of yourself, and you say, "Listen, dude, I've come back to give you this one bit of advice. Here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the studio yourself." What advice would you go back and give yourself if you could do that today?
Listen to artists, listen to what they want to do, listen to people who want to give you advice. And I'm not saying I didn't do that. It's not like, in hindsight, I should have done that. But, ultimately, like, especially in this day and age, like what I consider to be a successful record is a record that the artist is happy with, like that's really important. The artist has to be happy with it. And, the other measure of success on an album is, does someone hire you to make another album one day? And not necessarily the same person, but do you get to keep doing this? Then the last thing you did was successful if you got to do another one. But yeah, I mean, as far as advice, just, listen and make the people you're working with comfortable and enjoy being with you and enjoy working with you. And it really makes for a really great environment.
Yeah, you said the vibe is everything, right? It's all about the vibe.
It really is. Like, it really is. Like, any day of the week, I'd much rather listen to a record that gives me a mood and gives me a vibe than something that just sounds like pristine, but like the music is sort of transparent. It's just like, ooh, that snare drum sound is amazing. Like, who cares?
It's sort of funny because sometimes I find myself going and listening to a record that remember you talked about like abusing the tape and that becomes the sound. Maybe I hear something like that. I'm like, oh, how did they have that intention to make all those sounds like that? And maybe they never did. Maybe it was just that was a good vibe and that's the way it turned out. And you, like you said, you take what you got and you just make it work in the mix and there you go,
I mean, so like, I feel like one of the weirdest things I ever did in a mix, like there's this band called French Style Furs. And there's a song called, what's it called? Like, something like Miami.
Yeah, pulling it up now.
And like, so this song was recorded in their rehearsal
Miami,
room.
You are about to be surprised.
Yeah, that's the song. So on that song, it was recorded in their rehearsal room, everyone in the same room. And like, I guess the snares on the snare drum were really loose and the bass was just like rattling the snares constantly. So there was just these microphones that were just nothing but like, and I was like, oh, what am I going to do with that? I ended up, and it was like, okay, let's just not even use that. But then I had the ideas like, okay, what if I sidechain that with the kick drum and actually make it a part? And so in the end, this thing that was a total like, oh man, like this noise is everywhere and it's really annoying. I made it like a really, really key element of the song. So it's just like,
nice.
And it was like, oh, you know what I mean? Like it took this thing that was by all accounts, not good, not what anyone was going after. It's just, that's how they recorded, and just made it like a key thing. And it's like the coolest part of the song.
That's awesome. Yeah. Sometimes if you're not sure if it's working, you can try turning it down or go the opposite, turn it all the way up.
Turn it up. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. That's true too. Like, a really loud and proud vocal, even if it's someone who isn't super focused on pitch, something, like, if it sounds intentional and with heart, it is what it is. And that's, it's true. Singers like Iggy Pop, Nick Cave, like, you know what I mean? It's more about the emotion in their voice and the word. And, they don't have to be, pitch perfect every note out of their mouth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Man, for some reason, Hazel Atkins is coming to mind. I'm remembering his songs where it's like just distorted, loud vocals, just dominating.
Yeah.
But at the risk of going on another tangent, I'm going to say thank you so much for being on the show again with us, Adam. It's great to see you. Great to hang out with you.
Super fun.
Thanks for taking time out of your busy day to hang out with us on Recording Studio Rockstars. Where would you like the rock stars to go find out more about you online? What if they're ready to make their next rockin' album with you? Where should they go follow you, find you on the internet?
My website is atomgreenspan.com, spelled ATOM. You can find me on the grams. You can reach me through my website. You can DM me on the grams. I try, sometimes messages come into like weird mailboxes and like it's like 2 weeks before I see that I've had a message request, but like, feel free to hit me up through there. If it's something, where we need to get management involved, I will, can pass you to there, but I always like to just talk to, it's always nice to just talk to the people first rather than like talk to my manager. Don't call me. Sometimes sometimes things don't work out, but I like to at least, help out as much as I can, even if it's, some advice, even if it's, not really a right fit for us to really work together, like, at least like point people in the right direction. So,
well, it's awesome of you to come hang with us and do this,
Yeah, sure thing. Yeah. So my Instagram is a.atom.g. Where if you just search for Adam Greenspan, it's a photo of my thumbnail is me in front of the Joe Strummer mural at Niagara.
Oh, nice. I see that now.
Was it over in Alphabet City?
And I've got Do the Worm on Acropolis, so I'm going to watch that afterwards.
Yeah, yeah. You know what? Speaking, going back to the Clash, it was just recently Joe's. He had a big birthday or something, and so the estate, like the Joe Strummer Foundation, did a video where they asked people to submit photos of them in front of different Joe Strummer kind of art around the world, and obviously a lot of people sent in photos in front of Niagara because that's maybe one of the most well-known pieces. But I was like, in 2018, I was in Hong Kong and I just was like wandering around and I went up this alley and there was like a pasted on like picture of Joe Strummer on this wall. And I happened to be wearing my Sandinista Clash t-shirt. And I sent that photo in of me, and like, it's like one of the first featured photos in the video that they put out. And I was like, oh, that's so rad.
Nice, man. That's
I'm
great.
still a fan.
What were you doing in Hong Kong?
I might be a recording studio rock star, but I'm still a fan.
Yeah, nice, dude. What took you to Hong Kong?
I was just on holiday. We were going to visit some friends in Bali, and the flight was through there anyway. And I was like, well, why don't we like make it so we have like 2 or 3 days in Hong Kong on the way? Like, I always wanted to go to Hong Kong.
That's cool.
It was just a quick like 2 or 3 days there.
I spent a half a year there long time ago, 91. Wow. I was playing in a blues band. That's sort of where I first saw a studio and said, I think I want to do this for a living. So I came back and found
huge expat community. We were there on Halloween. Yeah. It was just like, dude, this is like Halloween in LA. This is insane.
Lang Kwai Fong. That's the area where all the clubs were and stuff.
Right.
Well, all right, dude, I'll keep taking us down tangents. We'll never hang up if I just keep going. That's just the way I roll.
Fair enough.
But, dude, so great to hang with you. Thanks for hanging with us, Rockstars. Thanks for listening. And Adam, I look forward to seeing you around the studio, man.
Thanks, man. Talk soon.
All right, cheers. Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. And if you want more free content from Recording Studio Rockstars, all you have to do is go to rsrockstars.com/email. Again, that's rsrockstars.com/email to enter your name and email, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, podcast updates, and even free gear giveaways for your studio. Just look for the link in the show notes below. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Hey, rock stars. I want to give a big thank you to our amazing sponsors who help make this episode possible. OWC, Jay-Z Microphones, Adam Audio, Isotope, Spectra 1964, and Sampley. Plus, remember to use these coupon codes for special discounts. At isotope.com/rockstars, use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off any plugin purchase. At jzmic.com, use the code ROCKSTAR for 40% off the V47, V67, or V12 microphones. Plus, get a free shock mount worth $120. And at Sampley.app, use the coupon code RSR20 for 20% off. And at recordingstudiorockstars.com/academy, use the coupon ROCKSTAR for 10% off. If you enjoy Recording Studio Rockstars, then please check out our sponsors using the link in our show notes, because it's a great way to help support this show. These are all things that I use in my own studio, and I highly recommend them for your studio as well. They're going to help you make your best record ever. I want to also thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars, Vlad Weselchenko and Braden Stremming, for additional podcast and video production. Thanks so much for listening, Rockstars, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.